The Mariners have their eye on the top international free agent pitcher in this year's class, plus Mitch Haniger is officially going to test the open market. We'll tell you our thoughts on that and more of Jerry Dipoto's comments down in Las Vegas here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is Wednesday, November 9th, 2022. This is Ty Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Subscribe, like, and turn on alerts if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform if you like what you hear. And if you want to hear from us even more, please consider signing up for our Patreon. The link, as well as our social accounts, is in the description below. On today's show, the GM meetings are underway in Las Vegas, and Jerry Dipoto met with the media yesterday. We're going to focus on three big topics he discussed, including the team's interest in Japanese pitcher Kodai Senga, Mitch Haniger's qualifying offer, and who the Mariners plan to protect from the Rule 5 draft, amongst other things. There were some other interesting notes from Dipoto's media appearance, but Colby, let's start with Senga, because this is really interesting. It's not very often that you hear from general managers or just any representative from a Major League Baseball team just outright call out a free agent by name and say, yeah, we're interested in this guy. We want to bring this guy here. But that's exactly what Jerry Dipoto did yesterday in talking with the media. He just outright said that he views Senga as an impact pitcher in Major League Baseball. He, according to John Morosi, confirmed the Mariners have done their due diligence on him and plan to contact his representatives at the appropriate time. So, when is the appropriate time, right? Because things get confusing when it comes to international free agents, especially when the posting system gets involved from Japan and all that. But the good news on this, with Senga in particular, is that he's already accrued 9+ years of service time in MPB and therefore cannot be posted. He is free to explore opportunities in Major League Baseball and other leagues around the world. But specifically in his case, his contract with SoftBank has an opt-out for this season that allows him to explore those opportunities in Major League Baseball specifically. So he is going to be free to sign with a team as soon as tomorrow, when free agency officially opens in Major League Baseball. So that's really exciting. Now, we need to say that just because Jerry Dipoto outright said, hey, we're interested in Senga, doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to land him. Ross Atkins of the Blue Jays general manager, also said, we really like Senga and are interested in him. So that doesn't necessarily mean anything, but let's get into the numbers here for Senga, who's pitched in MPB since 2012. And in those 11 seasons in his career, as I need to bring up his career numbers here, he's posted a 2.42 ERA. He's averaging exactly 10 strikeouts per 9 innings pitched, over 1,300 innings of work. And then specifically this past season, a 1.89 ERA. He struck out 9.7 hitters per 9, over 148 innings pitched in 23 starts. That's 159 strikeouts to 50 walks. He features a fastball and a splitter, which is often referred to as a ghost fork. It is absolutely nasty. If you can find it on Pitching Ninja's Twitter account. I also posted a video of one of Senga's last starts in Japan on my Twitter feed. Check it out, because that pitch is disgusting. Then there's also two breaking balls that leave a little bit more to be desired, and we'll see how that kind of how teams in Major League Baseball approach that, whichever team eventually lands him approaches that. But it does seem like there is some faith that he can start, even though that there's really only two pitches that teams right now feel good about. What else can you tell me about Senga, though, learning a little bit about him here?
Yeah, upper 90s fastball, which plays very well at the top of the zone thanks to the splitter. So he's effective that way. Something that's a little bit concerning, at least for me. 3.4 base on ball per 9. in Japan. It's not terrible, but it's not ideal. You probably want him lower than 3 in an inferior league. So it'll be interesting to see because we know that strikeouts are probably going to go down when he comes to Major League Baseball. It's just the way it typically works, especially when you consider the stuff that he has. And so if he's, walking 3.5 guys per 9 and he's only striking out 8.5, that's that's a pretty potentially damaging situation. But this is being factored into his market already. There's nobody really out there that thinks that Senga is, a number 1, number 2 type of pitcher. He's a 4, probably a very good 4. If he's got if you can figure out one of the breaking balls, maybe make that a 55 grade pitch, then he might be a 3. But the lack of like great command is going to hold him back from being a top end guy. But he's a very good pitcher, and his market's probably going to reflect that. Fangraphs, along with a few other places, seem to be projecting him pretty comfortably in the 4 to 5 year range at roughly between 14 to 16 million per year, somewhere in that range. So he's $15 million a year pitcher for 4 or 5 years, and he's entering his age 30 season. So yeah, there's some other things. There's some durability concerns. We don't need Ty to go over all the things that made Yusei Kikuchi a little risky in his first year. So, but they pretty much all apply to Senga as well. So the one thing we know about the Mariners is that they're not afraid to go into this market, particularly for the arms. They did it with Kikuchi. They did it with Flexen. They appear very willing to do it with Senga. And we know that they have pretty good roots, pretty good boots on the ground, covering the Japanese leagues and the Korean league in terms of scouting. So, yeah, I think it makes some sense here. I think, if you're paying him $4 and $60, I think that's fine. You could probably make that work, and it's a pretty solid ad just based on stuff. You never know how it's really going to play at the big league level, but I feel pretty confident this guy's at least a number 4 starter.
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting opportunity here. And Senga is 29 years old as of now, but will turn 30 on January 30th. So you are paying for his age 30, 31, 32, 33, potentially 34 seasons at roughly, as you mentioned, it seems like he's going to get about $14 to $16 million per year. So what this really does is bring up an interesting question: that is this just an exception? Is Senga just an exception for the Mariners because there's so much unknown about him and the stuff is really interesting, and especially that ghost fork and all that, the things that you can do with that? Or is this actually an indication that the Mariners are willing to spend some money to round off their starting rotation? Because we've heard from Dipoto that Chris Flexen keeps getting called on, that maybe even Marco Gonzalez could move here, that there are teams showing interest in their pitchers right now. And with him saying that too, kind of feels like a deal might be close, but that's a conversation for a little later on. But does this mean that the Mariners are actually willing to pay $15-ish million to round off their rotation with another free agent pitcher? Because that could put, in theory, guys like Nathan Eovaldi, Taijuan Walker, Jamison Tyone, Martin Perez on the table.
Yeah, it feels pretty likely that Chris Flexen's going to get traded this winter. It feels like there's enough interest in him. Maybe it's not a 1-for-1. We've talked about different package ideas on yesterday's show. So it feels like Flexen's definitely going to get traded. The interesting thing here is that what do you do with Marco? Jerry seemed to indicate that there was some interest in Marco as well. We did hear the rumor in July, or was it July, that the Phillies were interested in Marco Gonzalez for some reason. So maybe you could trade Marco. Maybe Marco is a salary dump type of thing, and maybe it's Marco for Max Kepler, blah, 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 whatever it is. So maybe that's a possibility as well. It feels like you have to trade Marco to not justify Senga, but like you can't pay Marco $7 million to pitch out of your bullpen this year. It's not a skill set he has, and
Mm-hmm.
You have to figure out what to do with him. So if they think they can move him and Flexen, and it sounds like they'll be able to move Flexen pretty easily, then yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense, because also moving those two, if you can move those two guys, you're going to clear, about $15 million off your budget, which is about what you're going to need to get Senga or Evaldi or Taiwan. So yeah, I think it makes sense. And we're talking about the Mariners, if they did something like this, we're talking about a rotation where somebody like Senga would probably be the number 5 starter.
Mm-hmm.
At least, in practical terms. So yeah, it's
Right.
something that we've talked about, how, the Mariners shouldn't ignore the rotation. The only concern here is that, is this money going to prevent them from going out and signing the second outfielder that they need, the second bat that they need? I don't know. We'll find out. But Senga's a really interesting player, and it's a fun idea, because it does show that the Mariners are thinking about just getting better in general, not just specifically we have to get a left-handed hitting left fielder who's, at least above average defensively and post a 335 on base. Like, no, they're just looking to get better in general.
Yeah. All right. So we got news on Mitch Haniger and what the Mariners plan on doing with him. Are they going to accept his qualifying offer? Are they going to decline it? We'll talk about that in just a moment. But real quick, a reminder, this episode of Locked On Mariners is brought to you by Simply Safe. If you thought about securing your home with home security but have been putting it off, you'll want to listen up. Right now, Locked On Mariners listeners can order the #1 rated Simply Safe home security system for 50% off. This is their biggest offer of the year, and you won't want to miss it. In an emergency, 24/7 professional monitoring agents use Fast Protect technology exclusively from Simply Safe to capture critical evidence and verify the threat is real, so you can get priority police response. Simply Safe is whole home security with advanced sensors for every room, window, and door, HD security cameras for inside and out, smarter ways to detect motion that alert you only when a threat is real, and even hazard sensors that detect fires, floods, and other threats to your home. 24/7 professional monitoring service costs less than $1 per day. That's less than half the price of ADT's traditional professionally installed system. With the top-rated Simply Safe app, stay in complete control of your system, anytime, anywhere, arm or disarm, unlock for a guest, access your cameras, or adjust system settings. Don't miss your chance to save big on the only security system I recommend. Get 50% off any new Simply Safe system at simplysafe.com/lockedonmlb. This is their biggest discount of the year, so don't wait. That's simplysafe.com/lockedonmlb. There's no safe like Simply Safe. You're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. So we now have some clarity as to what the Mariners are going to do about Mitch Haniger. And as expected, as I talked about on Friday's show when I went solo, it just didn't make sense for the Mariners to essentially give Mitch Haniger $20 million for one season, which is what they would be doing with the qualifying offer. I believe the qualifying offer is set at $19.2 million, $19.3 million this year. So yeah, essentially $20 million for a guy who unfortunately has really struggled to stay healthy and did not perform particularly well towards the end of the season after he returned from injury. And Jason A. Churchill, Prospect Insider, today also saying that he's been hearing that Haniger is potentially going to be somewhere in the range of a 1-year, $9 to $12 million contract. So why would you give him 20 if you could potentially get him for 9 to 12 for the same duration? And that's essentially what Jerry Dipoto said yesterday as well. He said, I would say over the last couple of years that this has escalated for Mitch, that he likes where our team is now. He likes our team. He likes where we are. He likes how our situation has evolved. I think he appreciates playing in Seattle. But there's actually a part in here that speaks specifically about payroll flexibility. Yeah, here it is. We have a lot of needs that we would like to fill. This is Jerry Dipoto speaking, and we'd like to have as much payroll flexibility in doing that as we can. That would be a sizable 1-year commitment when we would prefer to work out something that makes a little bit more sense for us and for Mitch too. Mm-hmm. So do you think maybe that hints at a multi-year deal in terms of what makes sense for Mitch as well? Because that's what it seems to indicate for me. Maybe it's an option, something like that. What do you think?
Yeah. For me, it's some kind of vesting option with other options built. It's a very bonus driven type of contract, I think is what Jerry's getting at. Giving Mitch $8-9 million on a flat rate is fine. But I think what you're really looking at if you're Seattle is you don't just want to hand out $9-10 million when you don't have to, just for vibes, just to reward somebody. So you want him to have to earn that, but you can't trust him to just give him, 16, 17, $18 million and be like, well, here you go. We know we're going to get this money back. No, you don't. Not with Mitch Haniger. So I think what he's getting at here is that, like, look, if Mitch Haniger was healthy, would he be one of those guys who could fill the hole and be one of those impact bats that we're looking for? Yeah, but we can't trust him to be healthy. We just can't. So what we're not going to do is we're not going to give him $19 million when we can get him for, we feel like, probably 9 and some incentives, or maybe like 2 and like 18 or something like that, instead of 1 and 19. So yeah, it just made no sense to give Mitch Haniger the qualifying offer. He's not trustworthy enough. I do think that ultimately it makes the most sense for Mitch Haniger to sign in Seattle, even if he has to leave a little bit of money on the table, not millions and millions of dollars, but if Seattle's offering him 1 and 9 with some incentives, that could take it up to 1 and 12, and say Arizona's offering him 1 and 10.5 flat, it probably makes sense for him to come back to Seattle. So I still think that there's a really good chance Haniger comes back to Seattle. The decision to give him the qualifying offer, that ship sailed probably in early September. It just he's not stayed healthy, and he hasn't really produced aside from last year when he was incredibly healthy, but he wasn't very good in 2019. He wasn't very good in 2022, and obviously he missed all of 2020 and most of 2019. So yeah, it was just never going to happen. So it like, to give Mitch Haniger the qualifying offer, essentially it sounds like Jerry basically saying, like, if we gave him the qualifying offer, we'd basically be giving him $10 million for free.
Yeah.
We're just not going to do that. That's what I read into those comments.
Yeah. Dipoto also said, we've been in touch with Mitch, and our hope is to work something out to have him come back as we expected. Obviously, he's now a free agent, and we knew that was going to be a part of this before he ever reached free agency. We will continue to be in contact throughout. Our goal is to bring him back. It remains to be seen whether that's a reality. And now, Dipoto has outright acknowledged, like, if we don't land Mitch, we'll have 2 outfield needs to fill. And so that's good, right? Because that means that he's not satisfied with the left field situation. Yeah. I think you and I both thought that, yeah, for sure they're going to do something about right field, whether it's bringing Mitch back or addressing that, with someone else. But left field was a little bit of a question mark. Were they just going to come back into 2023 thinking or saying, hey, like, we still have Jesse Winker. We have Jared. We like what we saw, that Jared did over the last month of the season, which that would be incredibly scary. We think that Dylan Moore can play there more, that would be incredibly scary, right? And so ultimately, though, Jerry has said, like, that's something that we are interested in addressing. So that's good to hear. I thought that Jerry said all the right things yesterday. He also talked about the willingness to move JP Crawford off a shortstop. Again, reiterated that hey, if we end up landing a shortstop who doesn't want to move off a shortstop, doesn't want to go to second base, we will have those discussions with JP Crawford. Right, just getting that out of the way and letting people know, like, we are open to that possibility. We would like to keep JP at shortstop, but if we have to move off of him, we will. So good to hear those things still, which also in turn kind of reiterates that they're interested in the shortstop market still, that they haven't been completely turned off of that, because things can change, right? The end of season press conference was a couple weeks ago. Now more discussions are being had. The season has actually ended. You're now in Vegas at the GM meetings where there's agents there and you're talking to guys. And, once that picture starts to clear up a bit, it starts to, for some teams, make it clear that, you're not really actually going to be involved in this market the way that you were hoping to be. But so far, seems like the Mariners still like where they're at on that front. And so, we'll just have to see how it all kind of goes. But to me, judging by his comments about the pitching situation in particular and how they've already received calls and how he's just outright kind of saying like, yeah, Chris Flexen is being called on. There's a lot of interest in Chris Flexen. Feels like he knows, like, okay, I'm going to get a trade that I like for him. We're pretty close. I think that the first move of the offseason really for the Mariners at this point is probably going to be a Chris Flexen trade. You getting that same feel?
It's interesting. There's a lot of, rumors flying around right now. Not rumors, but vague like ideas being thrown around, which is what the GM meetings are always all about. Just like, hey, this guy might be available. Oh, this team feels like they need to move this guy. And that's really what the GM meetings are about. It's interesting. I think it was Morosi, might have been Rosenthal, was talking about how there's a sense that the Rays are really motivated to get something done at these GM meetings because of their 40-man crunch, and they have to add, a handful of guys to their 40-man to protect him from the Rule 5, and they don't have the room. So I still think maybe the Rays are a team that maybe makes a non-Flexen move with Seattle. But yeah, I feel like if we're laying bets, like what's the first major domino to fall for the Mariners this offseason, I think it's probably a Flexen trade.
Yeah. It seems the most obvious, especially like, again, when you hear a GM just outright mentioning players that are potentially going on the move, that means that something's about to happen or close to happening, or, that's just because
they feel good about it.
Yeah, because, that's a whole leverage situation. That's a thing that compromises leverage for you as a team when you just outright start mentioning guys who are on the block, right? So you only say that when you know for sure, like, oh, yeah, I'm going to get something that I like for this guy.
Mm-hmm.
So
what's kind of interesting about that, too, is that, like, if hypothetically they trade Flexen for one of those outfield spots, conceivably that's not going to be for a lot of money, which would in theory mean that they added to their outfield without adding significant salary, which means they can pay a little more to the shortstop. So if you're really, hanging on for that Trey Turner dream and you're not sure how they're going to come up with that money, trading Flexen for a corner outfielder or part of a corner outfielder trade, is a pretty good way to add impact to your lineup without adding significant payroll along the way. So, if you're rooting for Trey Turner or Xander or one of those guys, you should really be rooting for Chris Flexen to be traded for somebody like we talked about yesterday, like Teoscar Hernandez, somebody who fills a need for you, who isn't going to cost 50, 60, 70, 90, $100 million.
Ryan Divish said that it seems likely Flexen could be moved in a package of players to get a position player. So there you go. Dipoto also said that the Mariners are planning on protecting Prelander Berroa, the right-handed pitcher that they acquired from the Giants for Donovan Walton last year, or earlier this year, rather, by adding him to the 40-man roster, and said that there are also a few other prospects that they plan on adding to the 40-man roster in order to protect them from the Rule 5, though he has not spoken to those players yet. So we don't know who those guys are just yet. There's been a lot of rumblings about Joseph Hernandez, the right-handed reliever down in Double-A. Travis Kuhn, also a right-handed reliever down in Double-A.
Pretty much know Cade Marlowe is going to get added.
Yeah, Cade Marlowe for sure. So that's about it, right? Well, Isaiah Campbell as well, who's finally healthy and pitching pretty well and could be a factor coming out of the Mariners bullpen at some point in 2023. So any other guys that we should be looking at potentially as maybe surprise adds to the 40-man?
I don't think so. I think what you're probably looking at. I think what we're probably looking at is obviously Berroa, since that's been confirmed, and then Campbell, Marlowe, and Kuhn. I feel like those are three pretty obvious fits to be added to the 40-man. Fernandez is kind of an interesting one, but I really think that's it. I don't think we're going to see we're not going to see like Sam Carlson. Like we're not going to see that. So
No.
I think it's pretty much those five guys that we just talked about. I can see all of them being added. I think for sure Marlowe will be. I'd be pretty surprised if Campbell was left off. I'd be pretty disappointed by that too. I think he can really help this Mariners bullpen. Kuhn probably should be added, especially if you're thinking about trading from your reliever stash to help get that bat. So I think Fernandez, I'm kind of on the fence about. I don't know if anybody would actually take him and carry him all year, but we'll see how the Mariners feel. And sometimes there's a surprise in there that we don't think about, and honestly, Kane Marlowe might have been that surprise if not for the whole playoff, taxi squad thing. So, I feel pretty good that Marlowe's going to get added, Berroa's going to get added, and I really hope Campbell and Kuhn are both added. Fernandez, we'll see.
So, lastly, Dipoto said Matt Brash is going to be ramped back up as a starter going into spring training, and then they'll adapt if he needs to go back to the bullpen. Basically, it's as insurance, as a form of insurance if there's injuries to the starting rotation. To me, Colby, I think this is a way to sell Matt Brash as a trade chip. Hey guys, look, he's getting ramped up as a starter again. He's a starter. We're going to sell him to you as a starter, not a reliever, as a starter. Yeah.
And that is how the Mariners acquired Randy Arozarena. I think what that's more about is I think that's actually more about, hey guys, we're pretty darn sure that we're going to be trading Marco Gonzalez and Chris Flexen. So we don't want to go out and have to sign, Michael Pineda types as like our sixth starter type of arm. So we want to have Brash, and then we want to see where Miller and Hancock and Dollard are. And so we'll stretch Brash out and all that. But to me, it's just kind of dumb. I think he's going to be a reliever. If he's pitching for you next year, it's going to be out of relief. It's just hard to imagine that he's figured out his control enough that he's going to pass guys like Dollard on the depth chart if Dollard survives. So I think for me, that's more about like, hey, we're going to trade Flexen and Marco, like guys in spring training were at least capable of going five innings, because we're not going to go and give the Michael Pineda types or the Danny types, we're not going to give them $4 million to be our number 6 starter if we sign like Senga. You know what I mean? So I think that's right. That is what that is about.
Yeah. And it's probably a little bit of both, right? Because I think Brash is going to be someone that gets of course. I think Brash is going to get asked about a lot in trades this offseason. That's going to be one of the hottest names that gets talked about between Jerry Dipoto, Justin Hollander, and other teams. And the Mariners are going to hold on to Brash very tightly, and they are not going to sell him as a reliever, right? If they are going to trade him, the team that's acquiring him, better be paying starter costs. And that's how I feel the Mariners are going to be viewing that as well.
I think, like, obviously it's different because the team's in a different situation, but they're going to look for like an Edwin Diaz type of haul in return. Just not prospect this time, major leaguers, but yeah.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for our show. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Titan Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Dane Gonzalez, that's DaneGnzlz, and Colby at CPAT11, that's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. And thank you again for making us your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast featuring the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. It's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts, just like us. And with that, have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you tomorrow. Peace.